Crackanory, Too Cracked for TV, The IT Man by Tom Meaton, read by Simon Bird.
Mike Parsons and Rob Parker were two peas from the same pod, although Rob was a little bigger and Mike a little greener. But in this pod there were only two peas, and life was sweet. P. The problems began when a third pea appeared in the pod, making it very cramped and generally sucked the life juice from the bigger pea, creating tension and ultimately death. Are you with me? Let me begin again. Mike and Rob quickly became best friends at school. Due to their surnames beginning in PAR, they were seated next to each other for every lesson and became known by teachers and pupils alike as the two peas. The nickname and dynamic was further forged when Rob bet Mike 2p that he couldn't jump off the climbing frame and land on one leg. Mike broke his ankle, and Rob claimed his 2p. They swore allegiances, made pacts, and even became blood brothers, still bearing the scars across their palms and possibly sharing the same diseases too. They had exciting plans for their futures, but unfortunately reality is sometimes less exciting. Mike followed Rob to Birmingham Poly, and then onto an average job at the same company in glamorous IT. Whilst some might see this kind of intense friendship as mildly homoerotic, Rob overcompensated by being very much a shagger. He had an innate gift of the gab, and he had one arched eyebrow, which meant even when his face was doing nothing, it was actually doing everything. Permanently interesting and interested, and that was hot. His stories of one-night stands and sexual adventures were legendary, and Mike was always in awe. Now here we arrive at the problem. Whilst Rob was testing the limits of his eyebrow and penis power, Mike met a girl, a lovely girl called Sal, the intrusive third P, Sally Palmer. During this period, Rob tried to be cool with his best friend hanging out with some bitch all the time, and he dealt with it very maturely by throwing himself further into booze and birds. When he emerged from his 6-month hangover and started to go to the pub again with Mike, the relentlessness of his ribbing knew no bounds. "Surprised you made it out tonight, Mike. Quite a hard walk with that ball and chain strapped to your ankles. What's that dent on your head? Didn't realise Sal had such big thumbs. Whoosh! Whoa! I can hear Sal's whip from here!" Sal was oblivious to her husband being stuck between the two people he loved most, and Rob was Mr. Charming when he occasionally crashed on the couch. It was on one of these couch-crashing evenings that Rob was to further stretch the pea-pod. After some drinks and ribbing at the local, the two men, who were more like boys, returned to Mike's and cracked open yet more booze. Sal was about to go to bed, but Rob decided that now, whilst slurring, was the best time to announce that he had a new job, a dream job. He had accepted an offer to be head IT consultant for Pear, the software and electronics company. As Rob regaled Mike and Sal with the perks of the job, international travel, massive salary, a company car, and more kudos than ever, Mike quietly seethed in the corner. 3 months ago, he was offered that job. He smiled weakly as Sal congratulated Rob, and then went to his shed, where he cracked open his emergency whiskey and sulked himself into a slumber. The reason Mike had turned down the job, that he was incidentally more qualified than Rob for, was that he and Sal were trying for a baby, but they were struggling to conceive, and Mike suspected he was to blame. Taking a job with erratic hours and travel was not conducive to trying for a baby, so Mike had reluctantly passed on the job offer. Although now, ironically, they were more desperate than ever for the extra money, as Sal wanted to start IVF. Mike was feeling an incredible pressure cooker pressure. Not only was his manliness being questioned, but his ability to provide for a family was too, a family that he couldn't even afford to create. Obviously Mike hadn't shared his pain with Rob, who had been predicting Sal and Mike would have demon spawn for some time, and that then all their lives would be over. For Mike, the annual IT conference was a timely relief from his vice-like pressure. He hadn't seen Rob for months, and they had both been looking forward to it. A whole week of seminars, lectures, blue sky thinking, and tons of drinking. And importantly for Rob, no Sal. He got his best pal all to himself. So when Rob picked Mike up in his flash car, Mike bit his tongue. He bit his sore tongue again when Rob informed him that because of his new industry kudos this year, he was giving a lecture at the conference. Nothing was going to stop this lad's debacle. That was the plan, anyway. But Sal had already texted 7 times and called 3. To Rob and Mike, every buzz of the phone was like having their balls tasered. A wince-inducing electric shock to Rob's uber-active pant nuts, and Mike's possibly defunct trouser globes. "Better not be like this all week. It's going to be a right fun killer," said Rob, hardly hiding his disdain. And although Mike wondered why Sal was being so needy and desperate to talk, he knew Rob was right, so without drawing attention to it, he turned his phone off. And when they arrived at the hotel, he didn't check in with his own name, he checked in under 2p, Mr. 2p. And he asked to swap rooms too. And although the receptionist raised an eyebrow at the name, and possibly thought that Rob and Mike were gay lovers having an illicit affair, which, metaphorically at least, they were, the name and room swap stood. When Mike met Rob in the hotel bar later, he was buzzing. He was free, probably for one night only, but the thrill of doing something so selfish was a release valve on his pressure cooker. This thrill manifested itself in a massive booze session with Rob. But when the 6th point was downed, Rob began his jibes, needling Mike about how boring his life is. "The only fun you get these days, Mike, is taking the bins out a day late. Me, I don't even bother taking them out sometimes. I just let it stack up. You know why? Because I can. I'm living the dream." Admittedly, this wasn't the best angle of attack. Who wants fetid, stinking rubbish in their kitchen? Rob, maybe. But after regaling Mike with his tales of freedom, adventure and cash, his point stood. Mike went to bed drunk, still slightly buzzing, but fundamentally jealous with a sprinkling of resentment. At 4:05 a.m, Mike was woken by a rustling outside his door, groggily climbed out of bed and saw an envelope. He was confused. On it was written, "The IT man." Some work for the coming week? Not at 4 a.m, surely. Mike opened it. Inside was £4,000 cash, a photo of an ordinary-looking man, a location, car park, a time, tomorrow at 10 a.m, and a note. "Your reputation precedes you. We were impressed with your other work. Half now, half later, as agreed." Mike's heart was skipping. What was this call to a venture? He pulled on his trousers and ran over to Rob's room. He paused as he was about to knock. Hold on. This is mine. Rob will just take over. No, I'm doing this. I'll show him who's boring. This P is about to get powerful, thought Mike. And with that thought, he went back to his room. And not being able to sleep again, he left to go to the car park mentioned in the note. Having arrived at the car park next to a busy road way too early, Mike promptly fell asleep. When he woke, possibly still drunk, it was 10:05 a.m. Mike worried he'd missed his 10 a.m. deadline, saw another new car parked up, and in his tense state, he approached. The couple was sitting there, and the woman beckoned him over. Mike thought they must be the next link in the mission. They know. Just as he was about to ask what was going on, and who was the IT man, he saw they were both wearing no trousers, and after the briefest of horrified glimpses, no pants either. They smiled at Mike. Mike managed the weakest of smiles back, and then ran back to his car in a ball of confusion. He started the car in a panic and reversed too quickly. Just as he did so, the man from the photo stepped into the car park walking his dog. As Mike's speeding, reversing car headed towards him, he jumped out of the way into the busy road behind. And just as he did so, in the cruelest of timings, a massive truck thundered past and hit the man, killing him instantly. The dog remained unharmed, and went off to sniff some piss. Mike couldn't comprehend what had just happened. It instantly felt like a dream, and for a moment he suspected he was still drunk, and had probably taken acid too. He had just killed a man. Kind of. He couldn't stay and watch the gory details unfurl. He returned to the hotel, head spinning. He immediately went to Rob's room and knocked on the door. No answer. The conference, thought Mike. He returned to his room, still highly shaken, and turned his phone back on. 32 missed calls from Sal, which was unusual in itself. What did she want? He listened to a voice message where she sounded desperate to tell him something. He phoned her, then hung up before she could answer. He couldn't tell her about the morning's events. How could he explain what had happened? But amongst the paranoia, shock, and fear, there was another feeling trying to poke through the flimsy surface. The thrill. He didn't know yet what this adventure was, but this was not boring Rob. No. This was movie stuff, right out of a script. The evening was creeping in when he woke, and yet again he was hungover, but at totally the wrong time of day. The phone rang, and he absent-mindedly picked it up, thinking it'd be Sal or Rob. A weird vocoded voice kicked in. "My client is impressed. Made it look like an accident. Clever. Some other work heads your way, along with the remainder of our agreed fee. Look outside your door." Mike's heart was thumping. He was deep in this now. He opened his door and saw a suitcase. He quickly shut the door and placed the case on the bed. And he knew before he opened it what he'd become. He knew what this adventure was, and it was insane. Mike was a hitman. Inside the case was another £4,000 cash, a photo, a time, tomorrow afternoon, a location, the same building as the IT conference, and a gun. It was no snazzy Bond-esque PPK. It was a converted starter pistol, but it was heavy in the hand, and Mike suddenly felt invincible. He felt like a professional, a hired gun. All those childhood fantasies were flooding back, but this time it was real. Fair enough, there was no Rob around to complete the fantasy, but maybe he'd tell him. Maybe he'd bring him in on the fun. Or maybe he'd use the gun once, then tell him. He'd be massively impressed. Blown away. He tried to sleep, but his mind was racing. He was going to kill a man tomorrow. After a seminar on IT where next, he was going to take away someone's life. Not a half accident like before. Actually shoot a man. There was no way he could sleep, and he wondered how hitmen managed it. Tomorrow, he vowed to buy some herbal sleeping pills. Rob was waiting outside the conference, sniggering as Mike approached. He was about to launch into one of his riffs when he noticed a different aura to Mike. He seemed almost like a different person, empowered and with a confidence, and he was also wearing some snazzy shades. This man meant business. And first up, it was actual business, the seminar. Mike couldn't really concentrate on the changing face of IT, and certainly didn't contribute to the blue sky session Rob led on RAM solutions, looking back to look forward. He was too busy trying to imagine shooting a man, and was constantly fiddling with the pistol in his pocket. At lunch, he avoided Rob and shut himself in a toilet cubicle to get his head in the hitman zone, refresh himself with the mission details, and also to have a poo. Afterwards, whilst washing his hands, Mike suddenly saw the hit walking straight up to a urinal behind him. He froze and was then sick into the sink. "Every night," the hit commented as he heard Mike hurl from over his shoulder. Mike fumbled for his gun, approached the man, and raised his shaking arm. He paused as a million thoughts tumbled through his mind, closed his eyes, and squeezed the trigger. The gun jammed. The hit turned around, screamed, and pissed all over Mike's slacks. The hit ran for the door and sprinted down the corridor. Mike followed and shouted, "Sorry, I'm new to this," like the true pro he was. The chase continued up a fire escape and stopped when they reached the roof. They were both exhausted, and the hit was wild-eyed with panic. Mike could hardly breathe. A wheezing Mike raised the gun once more, desperate for this to be over. The man backed away to the edge of the roof and began to cry. "Oh, don't do that, please," Mike pleaded. The hit was utterly confused and desperate, and dropped to his knees in prayer. "Oh, don't do that either," said Mike impatiently. The confused man jumped up obediently, slipped on the edge of the roof, and fell. Mike reached the edge to see the hit fall onto a car in the car park below and create a meld of blood and BMW. The car alarm began screaming, and Mike ran. A crowd of people gathered round the horrific scene. A panicked Mike threw his shades and gun into a bin and attempted to slope off. Just as he thought he was clear, he heard Rob calling his name. The two friends stared at each other, Rob with his one raised eyebrow, and Mike unable to talk, until Rob led him round the corner to some bins out the back. Mike took a deep breath and said, "You are not going to believe this," revelling in being the one to tell a story for once. "I've become a hitman." Rob laughed. "I mean it. I've killed 2 people. Rob laughed even more. "This is serious, Rob," Whisper shouted Mike. "I know," replied Rob, still laughing. Rob rummaged in his pocket and put a device up to his throat. "You are not a very good one, though, are you?" Mike's jaw dropped. It was the same vocoded voice he'd heard on the phone. As ever, Mike couldn't speak. "I knew you'd take the bait. Unable to resist, unable to work it out. You loved it, didn't you?" Rob vocoded. Rob put his hand in his pocket and pulled out an envelope with "The IT Man" written on it. "Your final hit, Mike." Utterly bamboozled, Mike opened the envelope, and there was the location, his house, the time, ASAP, along with a photo of Sal. "Are you insane?" cried Mike. "No, I'm Rob. Think about it, though. The lads will be back together like old times. Get rid of her. Just us on adventures like this. It'd be awesome. She has ruined everything. I can't see you getting your balls busted anymore. It has to end." "Oh, Christ," whimpered Mike. And if you don't do it, I'll tell the police you've just killed 2 people. Oh, Jesus Christ, cried Mike. But they won't believe you. They were accidents, he stammered. Oh, don't worry about that. I took photos, mate. I think you waving a gun about before a man falls to his death is pretty conclusive. I've thought of everything, shouted Rob, high on his own mind snap. Mike was sick again. Rob patted him on the back and stroked his hair like the great mate he was, and for the first time in a few days Mike began to sober up, very quickly, so quickly he momentarily fancied another drink. What if we just don't do either? Said Mike, squirming his way around the situation. Not an option, cowboy, whooped Rob. You're asking me to choose you or her, mumbled Mike, realising he was utterly out of control of events. Yes, exactly. Finally, the 2 peas back in the driving seat. Sal's a nightmare. Next thing you know, you 2 will probably be having demons spawn together, and then I will never see you. Can't let that happen, pal. Let's destroy the mothership now. Mike was dumbfounded. How had it come to this? His best friend had gone mental, he'd killed 2 men, and now he's about to kill his own wife. As these thoughts flashed through his head, his phone buzzed. He took it out of his pocket, and both Mike and Rob saw it was Sal calling, again. Rob nodded slowly and surely, eyebrow raised. Finally Mike knew what he had to do, and slowly nodded back. This was it. Suddenly Mike ran at Rob, arms flailing, no plan, just plain fury, months, no, years of frustration, resentment, jealousy and pressure pouring out of him in one wild attack. Rob was utterly thrown off guard. He had not thought of this. Mike pummeled Rob with his fists, pounding his smug face into pea soup. An unrelenting ruby-red mist had descended. Mike was unstoppable. His hands gripped Rob's throat and squeezed. It was brutal. At one point, Rob's ever-arching brow seemed to swap from one eye to another. It was horrific. But Mike didn't stop. He didn't even know how to stop. Even through Rob gargling with blood. I love you, Mike. And then it did stop. Rob was lifeless. Nothing. After momentarily becoming the cold hitman he'd once dreamed of, Mike collapsed into a sobbing mess, staring at Rob laying dead. His phone buzzed once more. Sal. And instead of feeling pestered by her, he felt nothing but love for that endless buzz. He still didn't answer. He gathered himself together, placed 2 peas in Rob's eyes, and left. When Mike finally arrived home, he opened the front door with a smile and a bunch of flowers, and found Sal was in floods of tears. I was phoning to tell you something, Mike. Something I have to tell you, sobbed Sal. Have you been speaking to Rob? But before she could continue, Mike, with a newfound confidence, held up his hand and began a heartfelt speech. He apologised for being a total dick. It was his fault, but he also realised that being with Rob was bad for him, and therefore bad for him and Sal. He vowed never to see Rob again, and as an added bonus, he had received a wedge of cash as an advance on a promotion. Sal was overwhelmed. Mike had swiped away so many of her fears in one swoop. They held each other. "What were you going to tell me?" said Mike. Sal was about to speak, but couldn't. She couldn't tell Mike. Mike squeezed her gently, and then finally Sal smiled and said, "I'm pregnant." They were both ecstatic, a wonderfully mushy end to this whole peas process. 4 months later, baby Peter was born, and Mike was awash with happiness. When Sal held Peter for the first time, she thought back to the night when Mike slept in the shed, the night Peter was conceived, and Peter gurgled, staring back at her, looking both interesting and interested, with his one distinctive, arched brow.